Hi, welcome to Family History Today, the Center for Jewish History's monthly series of genealogy-themed public programs. My name is Moria Amit, and I'm the manager of the center's Ackman and Ziff Family Genealogy Institute. Thank you all for joining us today. The Center for Jewish History provides a collaborative home for 5 in-house partner organizations that together form the largest and most comprehensive archive on the modern Jewish experience outside of Israel. In addition, the center houses the Genealogy Institute, where we assist people of all ages, abilities, and levels of experience, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. We encourage you to visit our Genealogy Institute Tuesday through Thursday, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., no appointment needed. At the Institute, you'll enjoy free access to genealogy databases and reference books, with our librarians and experienced volunteers on hand to provide guidance and direct you to relevant resources in our partner collections. If you're unable to visit us in person, you may email us at gi@cjh.org to ask for advice or to schedule a free 45-minute Zoom consultation. I have a few housekeeping notes before we launch into today's program. Please send us your questions and comments anytime during this program by using the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Please note, however, that our guest speaker will only answer your questions after their presentation in the dedicated Q&A portion of this program. If you'd like to view the captions for this program, click on the closed caption or CC button on the bottom of your screen and then click Show Subtitles. This program will be recorded. Please note that we correct the auto captions for all our program videos, so it typically takes us about 2 to 3 weeks to post them online. Once the video is online, you'll all receive an email with the link to watch it. So, without further ado, today I'm thrilled to introduce Caitlin Hollander-Waas, who so generously developed this timely talk at my request. A little bit selfishly on my part, I must admit. Caitlin is co-owner of Hollander-Waas Jewish Heritage Services, where she specializes in Jewish genealogy, heritage research, and high-value estate cases. Her citizenship reclamation work has been featured in Family Tree magazine, Times of Israel, and the South Florida Sun Sentinel, among other publications. Additionally, Caitlin works as a genealogist for Jewish Gen's Calico Genealogy Center at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. And lastly, she's a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, and the Jewish Genealogical Society of New York. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for joining us today, and I'm turning it over to you now.
Thank you so much. Give me one moment. Perfect. So, hi, everyone. The talk is Restoring Roots, a practical discussion of heritage citizenship. So, first and foremost, why citizenship reclamation? Why are people so interested in it? There are a few reasons, as we all know. I'll go into those in future, but it isn't something new. This is something people have been pursuing for decades at this point. Essentially, what I'm going to discuss today is an overview of heritage citizenship. So what is it? Why do people go through with it? What ramifications can it have? And then how to navigate the process specifically for Germany, Poland, and Hungary. Those are 3 of the most common countries that I work with personally. Common challenges and tips for success. Of course, I'm going to put this right out there right away. This is not any sort of legal advice. This is not any sort of genealogical advice. I'm not your genealogist. I'm not working with you directly. So take these as general questions and answers, and I'm happy to answer more specific questions at the end of the presentation. So first, what are citizenship reclamation? What's heritage citizenship? And, why do we care? So citizenship reclamation, both of these fall under the umbrella of acquisition of citizenship in a country basically based on your family history, whether it's based on ancestral ties. So my ancestors were Polish citizens and I want to be a Polish citizen, or whether it's restitution based on persecution. So that can be anywhere from the Spanish or Portuguese reclamation processes, Germany, Austria, etc. Common countries for Jews are going to include Usually you see Germany, Austria, Czechia, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Romania, Hungary, Spain, Portugal. There are a lot of countries under this umbrella that all have different programs. Every citizenship reclamation process is different. It requires different elements and has different requirements, as you're going to see in the three countries that I'm spotlighting today. So why? I once said in an interview about this topic that a Jew can never have too many passports. That's a personal belief of mine. To give you some context here, my grandfather was born in Nazi Germany in 1938. And this specifically is something that I feel very strongly about as a result. I myself am actually a German citizen through their citizenship reclamation. So why? There's fear and uncertainty, politics, anti-Semitism, economic uncertainty, the usual reasons that we pick up and we go someplace else. Ancestral trauma. It's personally, I have what I refer to as my shuttle senses. I sleep with my passports in my nightstand. It's something that's sort of ingrained into me. It's something that I instinctively do. Some of it is wanting to set right or wrong. One of my branches of my family lived in Germany essentially as far back as there are records. There's genetic evidence of my family being in Germany for essentially as long as Jews have been in Germany. And so the idea that I could set right this thing that was taken from my family, that was very much something that was not only theirs, but part of their identity, was extremely meaningful for me personally. It was a case of, this is mine. This is supposed to be mine, and it isn't. And I can make this right. And then, there are the obvious benefits of having EU citizenship. There's mobility within the EU. Even if you're a citizen of, we'll say, Latvia, you don't have to go to Latvia. You can live somewhere else in the EU. You have the access to the healthcare, the job markets, education. And there's also, during the process, and this is something even I experienced, you really do get a deeper level of understanding and connection to the family history itself. So today I'm discussing specifically three paths to heritage citizenship. Those are the paths via Germany, Hungary, and Poland. There are obviously, as I mentioned, many, many, many other paths that Jews tend to take specifically. These are the three that not only do I go through most often, but that I tend to recommend the most if possible. Austria as well, but I have the most experience in these three. So basics. Germany, the eligibility is based off of Holocaust restitution. So you're going to require, and for all of them, you will require the vital records and the proof of the ancestral persecution. I'm going to go into all of this in detail in a minute. Hungary, this is what's called an ancestral citizenship. So it's a citizenship under the assumption that even if your family hasn't lived in Hungary, you are, as the child of the child of the child of a Hungarian citizen, that line is unbroken and you are entitled to Hungarian citizenship. Similarly, Poland has citizenship along the same lines. Hungary and Poland differ in one huge way, well, in a few huge ways, timelet, and that Hungary can require a language test. I'm going to go into that in detail in a minute, but that can be a major, major hurdle when you're dealing with Hungary specifically. So first, right off the bat, every single process is going to require you to prove your relationship to the ancestor in question. You can't just say, well, my grandfather was X and he did this. You have to prove the route. What does that mean? When I was applying for German citizenship, that meant I produced my birth certificate, my parents' marriage. So my birth certificate has my parents' names on them. Parents' marriage has that, plus their parents' names. My father's birth certificate, which has his parents' names. My grandparents' marriage certificate, and then the information regarding my grandfather, who was the German in question. You will need long form certified vital records. Those are important. There's a reason I have this bold and underlined. I'll go into that more in detail in the future, but chances are you do not have the proper documentation right now to prove this. You might need immigration documents. So documents showing when your ancestor left this country, when they came to a new country. Is there a naturalization document that actually can throw off your path to citizenship? When did this occur? What proof do you have essentially of their movements, of their migration, and where they resided? Many of these routes are going to require these documents be translated. Poland, for example, requires a translator that they themselves have certified. This can be complicated and obviously expensive. FBI background check be required. This sounds more complicated than it is. Whenever I say FBI background check to somebody, they get very, very tense. This is actually fingerprinting. You can do it at your post office. Of all of this, this is probably the easiest thing of all of it to do. And then, depending on the route you go, the documents may need to be apostilled, which is an additional form of verification, which I'll get to in a moment. So these are the basics that are going to apply to most citizenship reclamation processes. Essentially, you're proving both your eligibility as a descendant of this person, so this person's eligibility to pass that right to you, and the fact that you are in fact, a descendant of said person. So there are two things that you need to prove here: the eligibility, and then that you're who you say you are, and who you say you are in relation to the ancestor in question. So I'll get right into it. Germany. Germany tends to be the easiest route. I tend to say to people it's because Germany actually does want to specifically give Jews citizenship, and this is a specific route that, while not only Jews are qualified, the majority of people who apply through it are Jewish. It applies to, and this is to quote their specific wording, victims of persecution by the Nazi regime who were deprived of their German nationality on political, racial, or religious grounds between January 30th, 1933 and May 8th, 1945. So this can be because the citizenship was revoked. This applies to the majority of Jews, both those who had left Germany and those who had stayed. The citizenship was never granted. That can apply to, for example, a woman who married a German Jewish man and was never given the reciprocal citizenship because she was Jewish, or the citizenship was surrendered. So, for example, when my family naturalized in the United States, they surrendered their German citizenship, but that doesn't, cancel out my eligibility for the citizenship. And it's also very important to note, over time, the requirements have widened. I wouldn't have been eligible several years ago. You might actually be eligible now, even if you've looked into it in the past. I highly recommend reading the new requirements. They've widened several times, even in the last decade. It's something that, while it didn't apply to as many people and it tended to have a lot of restrictions specifically based on gender and time of birth, now it's much, much more open. So, document requirements. And in this case, I'm actually have a copy of my great-grandmother's naturalization in New Jersey. So this is a good example of what I would refer to as evidence of loss of citizenship, evidence of persecution. So this is this is a record proving my path to the ancestor. Let's say I have the records that show, that I'm who I say I am, I'm the great-grandchild of, and I'm the grandchild of. So then I have this document. It says that my great-grandmother was Elsa Hollander, born Cohen, where she lives in Irvington, New Jersey, that her citizenship is she is stateless, last of Germany. That's important here because that shows that she does not have a citizenship. Where was she married? She was married 1935 in Germany. She's born in Germany. Where was her oldest child born? In Germany. And so this provides that proof for loss of citizenship and of persecution. This is a very clear document, and it shows, this is what's going on here. So essentially, though, for Germany, you need to prove those two things. It tends to be, I do tell people, it tends to be the easiest route, but at the same time, you need to be exact in what you're presenting to them. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, Hungary. Hungary is great for one very specific reason. There is no generational or time limit here. So if your, third great-grandfather left Hungary in, we'll say, 1890, there is a possibility you could take this route. There are obviously complications, but you do have a little bit more freedom because of the lack of a generational limit. So there are a few different paths that you can take. There's what's called verification, which is the most straightforward, easiest route. It works under the assumption that you are already a Hungarian citizen because Hungarian citizenship is transferred by blood. There is by statement, which is essentially you claiming it, but it could not be passed down to your descendants, or to a simplified naturalization, which tends to be the most common route in my experience, but it depends on when your ancestor left, the sex of your ancestor, and their biographical details. So there are a few elements at play here that decide what route you can take, and each path does have different requirements. So this is going to be a lot of text, but I'll try and sum it up as best I can. So there are a few major dates that are going to be at play here, and it's based on the when laws were passed and also on various historical events. So the biggest date at play is going to be October 1st, 1957. So a child who is born after the state to a Hungarian citizen, whether the citizen is their mother or their father, is automatically a Hungarian citizen at birth. No complications there with it. Before that date, if they were born to a Hungarian mother and a non-Hungarian father, they weren't, but they can naturalize via statement. The descendants have to do a simplified naturalization. And it's important to note here that if, for example, you have a woman who will say she was a Hungarian citizen, she married a non-Hungarian citizen in 1956 and then has a child in 1958, that child is not a Hungarian citizen because the mother would have lost her Hungarian citizenship upon marriage. So that is a huge element of this that is at play. So the dates here are very, very particular, and you need to be aware of these parameters when you're looking at applying. Similarly, if your ancestor left Hungary before September 1st, 1929, if they continuously resided outside of Hungary and didn't re-register with their consulate, they could lose their Hungarian citizenship. So this meant that they would have to go in, and this is 10 years from the last date stamped on their passport. There were ways to reconfirm it, but this does open up a much more complicated path. Similarly, after 1921, if your ancestor, let's say, moved from Budapest to, we'll say, Vienna, they could have lost their Hungarian citizenship and acquired the local citizenship. There are notable exceptions to this, both country-based and regionally based, but you can run into an issue where the person does not retain Hungarian citizenship, even if they didn't necessarily adopt the citizenship of their new country. So easiest route, like I said, is verification of citizenship. So that's like if I say, my direct male line, so my father's 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 father left the territory within the borders of present-day Hungary. So we'll say Budapest, places that are currently still Hungary. They're not Ukraine. They're not Czechia. This place is Hungary now, after 1929. So in this case, we'll need to provide the relevant births and marriages along that line. So showing the descendancy along this family tree, long form, certified, and with a certified translation. Anything that you have that could prove the Hungarian citizenship of your ancestors. So this doesn't work like American citizenship where citizenship is transmitted by where they are born. Rather, it works by inheritance, by blood. So while that is what would allow you to claim citizenship, it also means that you have to show that your ancestor was in fact a Hungarian citizen. So that could be anything from identity paperwork, if they came to the US after 1929, their visa paperwork, knowing what papers they traveled under, etc. And then this is the most interesting wrinkle to it, in my opinion, your birth and marriage and divorce, if relevant, records to properly register them in Hungary, because the birth, marriage, and death and divorces of a Hungarian citizen must be registered in Hungary, even if they did not occur there. So all of those things need to be put together. Meanwhile, there's also the option of a simplified naturalization. This is going to apply more in the cases where, somebody's great grandmother, will say, came in 1900 or 1925. So everything's required before, but there is a major wrinkle. You need to have basic knowledge of Hungarian. So to understand and communicate, there is an interview in Hungarian. It is spoken. This is not an easy language. This is where I always, always emphasize to people that this is not an easy language. It is not a Romance language. It is not a Germanic language. It's not even an Indo-European language. It is related distantly to Finnish. It is related distantly to Estonian. It is an extraordinarily difficult language to learn. If you are going this route, please, please, please engage a professional tutor. Do not, go through the whole process and then, everything falls apart when you do this language test. It is not impossible, but it is most certainly not an easy language at all. And you do not move forward until you are confident there, because quite frankly, this is the biggest stumbling block that I see for people with Hungarian citizenship. Again, it's not impossible, You can do it. People do it. I have clients who've done it, but it is most certainly not the easiest route to take as far as languages go. So then there's the last one. This is the one that most people tend to instinctively go towards, Polish citizenship. So your ancestor has to have resided in Poland after January of 1920. This is usually the first tripping point. Because we're talking about modern Poland, we're not talking about the Austro-Hungarian Empire, we're not talking about the Russian Empire, we're not talking about Prussia. We are talking about Poland. So after January 1920, your ancestor has to have resided in Poland as a Polish citizen. And they cannot have lost their Polish citizenship. So we need an unbroken line from your ancestor to you. This is where the other complication involved shows up. So this means that you have to prove your ancestor's Polish citizenship. This is one of the more difficult elements here. So you need a passport, proof that they were the resident there, birth records, etc. These records do exist. These records often survive. You can get passport numbers from immigration records, visa applications, same thing with residency proof, birth records, etc. However, it can be a little bit more difficult in this case because they do require concrete proof. You also need to prove that nobody along that line lost citizenship via naturalization or the service in a foreign military. And by a foreign military, I mean foreign to Poland. So, for example, I had a client whose father served in the IDF because obviously they're Israeli, they were drafted, that excluded. Similarly, I've had people whose ancestors served in the US military, they were excluded. There are ways around that. They are more difficult and they are not sure things. So when somebody runs into that issue in particular, I tend to say if there's another route, we'll take that. Everything that is submitted also has to be approved, have to be translated by a government approved translator. We've run into situations where the nearest one might be located in Texas. But this does tend to be add another wrinkle onto it. It can make it more expensive. Well, it does make it more expensive, and it can also just, in general, make it a little more complicated. So, I'm listing off all of these document types. And that's, I find that people are like, okay, well, I don't even know how to start getting that. So I try to go over the basics. What you need are the long form certified copies of vital records. And I keep saying this again and again and again. And I keep emphasizing long form and certified. The copies you have at home are very likely not going to be relevant for this, and you have to specifically request a long form copy. So, for example, the New York City Department of Health might be where you're requesting a record from. Note, the New York City Department of Health and the New York State Department of Health are two completely different agencies that do not talk to each other. You might need it from the Florida State Department of Health. You might need it from the GRO if you're in the UK. You have to request it from the relevant government agency that holds that document. You also have to request records from the country you are naturalizing in, so from their relevant government agencies, which means actually locating and identifying the documents of your ancestors and then requesting the certified copies. People tend to freeze up at this idea and say, how would I even do this? The answer, and I hate to put it like this, is the same way that you would request the document from the US. You'll contact the relevant government agency, whether it is an archive, a health department, etc., a vital statistics department, and request the document through their routes. There are ways to request documents from anywhere that holds documents. It just might be complicated, the requirements for them, how you have to prove your relationship, etc. Be aware of those requirements before you go in to submit, just so that you're not, submitting a whole request with a money order and then it bounces back to you saying, no, you can't have that. You also have to have, the copies of the relevant immigration, naturalization documents, or the proof that they don't exist. USCIS, the National Archives, wherever is relevant in your case for immigration and naturalization, or, the letter that says we don't have any proof that this person is naturalized. In these cases, forms are filled out. They're sent in either electronically or by mail. Triple and quadruple check the proofs that they require for you to get the copy, because you might want to send it in, after you have a copy of your birth record, because you have to prove that you're somebody's child, or after you have the copy of your grandparents' marriage, because you have to prove this line. Also be aware that how you pay for it differs with different departments. So you need to, triple check before you submit something. I've had people have forms sent back because they didn't read the fine print. They didn't make sure to send, a money order instead of a personal check, for example. Some jurisdictions can take longer than others to reply. Be aware of this. Speak to others who are doing this and see what they're doing. For example, the state of New York can take 18 months to send you something. If you're requesting something from New York, you might want to request from the town where it occurred as opposed to the state, because quite frankly, you will be waiting for well over a year, if you're lucky, well over a year, to get that document. So, common pitfalls, challenges. I keep emphasizing the phrase long form certified, and there's a reason for this. One of the most common things I run into with people is, oh, well, I have a copy of my marriage, so can I just use that? Oh, I have a copy of my birth certificate, can I use that? Probably not. What you have is probably not accurate. When you're applying to request a copy of it, you have to triple check that you are requesting the right document. I frequently see people who will send out a document request, get the wrong thing back, and then say, well, I didn't know to check that box. It has to be the long form certified copy. This isn't something that you can, take the shortcut on. You need to be sure that you're getting the right documents, and it's probably not what you already have. Another thing that I run into often with people is they'll say, oh, well, I know my grandfather came from Poland, but they don't know, what year, they don't know where, and they try and jump right into the process without actually looking at the requirements and looking at the records. And sometimes, we'll have somebody come to us say, oh, we've been trying for X number of years to get the citizenship. Why isn't it working? And I'll look and be like, well, you weren't eligible for it. You weren't, the issue is at the very beginning. You don't have the documents that prove any of this. Less frequently, but still something that can occur, is you run into issues with missing or destroyed records. Oftentimes, somebody will step back and say, oh, well, it's missing, it's destroyed, there's no way to move ahead, I'm done. Sometimes there is. Sometimes there are ways to have a document issued when you can provide proof that that event happened. Sometimes you can work around the fact that the document is missing or destroyed, especially if that lack of document is a well-known factor. If we're talking, I need to prove that somebody was persecuted by the Nazis, but where they were, there are no surviving records from this particular camp or ghetto. The German authorities will be like, well, we know this, that's okay. Or if I need to have a birth certificate issued from certain towns in what's now Poland, what was Galicia, and I say, I need this birth record. However, I know, that these records were all destroyed. Here's a copy of my great-great-grandfather's passport or his visa application that cites that original record. Can you reissue a new copy of it? Depending on the details of it and the proof you provide, the answer can be yes. So you have to be aware of what could be missing and be willing to go out and request it. And sort of on that general idea, one of the biggest pitfalls I see for people in these processes is looking for shortcuts. There isn't one. You do have to, like I said, you can't say, oh, well, I have a copy of my birth certificate at home. It'll be fine. It won't be. And if you're looking for a shortcut and you try, oh, I don't want to pay for another copy of this, I don't need to know the exact place, the exact date, and then you submit the application and it gets bounced back to you, your shortcut just cost you, months or even years of waiting time. The last pitfall is one that is not on you. It is on the consular authorities, and I always warn people about this because I've had some issues with them recently. Sometimes they can decide through their own, either an internal memo that goes to everybody or their own personal feelings that day, that they're going to require more or less or something different. I had a client who, for some reason, the German consulate she was applying at required proof that her family was Jewish, despite it being very clearly indicated on the documents she did provide. He required additional proof. I've run into issues with consular authorities deciding that something isn't good enough or something is too good. And, oh, you didn't need to have that. Sometimes they can have a little bit too much power in their little world. So just be aware that sometimes you can do everything right and an internal memo may have derailed it, or even just somebody having a bad day. So I always do tend to caution people in that. And even different consulates for the same country can be wildly different in how they rule and what judgments they make. So let's talk some practical tips, because I'm sort of, I'm talking about all these negatives, all these things. First and foremost is you have to have a strong foundation. You need to be confident in the details of the family history. You have to know, where was great grandpa born? When did he and great grandma get married? Where did they get married? You need to know these details, be confident in the family history, and have to be able to back it up. You don't want to start ordering and then, be $100 of documents in and then realize you're not even eligible. Or you don't know, when grandpa actually came to America. Or, you don't know these details. Similarly, and in order to stay organized, build a clear timeline and a checklist. So you have to know, what do you already order? What do you need to order? Make this list, say, what documents have arrived, what steps are next, because you don't want to double order one document and then not have ordered something else, have ordered something and then misplaced it and then order it again. Be organized about this, move forward with a list, move forward with a checklist, and have that checklist assembled before you start ordering, so that you know what is needed and what the purpose of each document is. If I say to myself, oh, I don't need this marriage document, yes, I do. So number 3, don't hesitate to seek professional help. I'm not just referring to genealogists or lawyers, language teachers. If you have to learn Hungarian, engage a language teacher. Please, 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 please engage a language teacher, because this is not a language that is easy to DIY unless you are extraordinarily talented. Ask the consular authorities a question, send them an email, say, hey, I'm doing this. Is there something in addition I need? Be willing to speak to archivists, to genealogists, lawyers. If it is needed, do not be afraid to ask for help, because nothing is more frustrating than sending in this application and having it bounce back because you didn't provide enough evidence, because you're not actually eligible, or because they don't want to approve any of the documents that you've already spent so much money on ordering and having translated. So there are some pretty key important things to discuss about this. Mostly heritage citizenship, it will connect you to your past. It's going to secure your future. It's something that I feel very strongly about, strongly enough that I actually pursued it for myself, and it's something that I work on and I speak on a daily basis. I like having the security of my second passport. I like knowing that I have another place to go. I like having that, and I also like it because it's mine. Because it should have been mine. It's supposed to be mine. It's mine. I know with Germany in particular, people do. I will sidebar here. People do sometimes get concerned. They see, oh, well, Germany has draft. Yes, but they specifically exclude Jews from compulsory military service. That's the number one concern I hear with Germany. I always make sure to let people know that. Each citizenship reclamation process, it does have unique requirements. It can be achieved, but you have to be prepared. You can't just walk in one day and say, hi, I want to be a citizen. You have to be prepared with the relevant documentation, knowing your dates, knowing the names, being able to prove that, this name change exists. How can I prove that these two people are the same person? This date isn't the same on all these documents. Can I prove that these are the same man? It really does often come down to being as prepared as humanly possible for these applications, and being prepared before you even go into the document ordering phase. Knowing your stuff, knowing when, where, and whom, what names they're going under, and being able to prove every step of it. There are challenges, missing documents, legal nuances, somebody who doesn't want to be found, complicated name changes. They can be navigated. There is almost always a record. There is not always a record, but there is almost always a record. And if you can prove it, it is achievable. Sometimes there are cases that while the person is eligible, it can't be proven to the degree that the country in question wants. That can be very frustrating. There are some countries which, and I'm wording it very carefully here, and I am not going to specify, which go out of their way to apply their laws in the strictest form possible for Jewish applicants. in those cases, even if you apply and you have everything right, there is always a possibility that you will be denied simply based on your origin. This is not legal under these countries' laws, but it is not often something that is followed up on within those countries because it tends to be a more accepted practice than we would think of it. I caution my clients always to make sure you have the most bulletproof case you possibly can, and to basically go back over and check again and again and again, because even if your case would have passed perfectly, if you had a different, last name, a different heritage, it may not pass because you're Jewish. And I'll put that very bluntly there, because there are some countries in Europe in particular that are notorious for that. And in those cases, if you are denied, that is not because you were not prepared. It's not because you didn't have a strong case. It is pure bias. And so I do always caution people that there are certain countries where you want to know going in that there's a possibility you could be denied even after doing everything right, simply because your ancestors were Jewish. And that's a very big caveat for me to put out there, but it is extremely important for people to know that even if you do everything correct, it can still not happen. So I tend to talk very quickly, as I'm sure everybody here has noticed. I also tend to leave a lot of space for questions, because I know something like this in particular, and I can see the questions sort of popping up in the chat. I know something like this can be highly, highly technical, and I know that it can open up a lot of questions for people. So I'm actually going to open up the floor, if that's all right with everybody, for questions, because I know I did sort of go over an overview here, but.
Okay. Caitlin, can you please stop your screen share first?
Sure.
And then I'll start to read the questions.
Give me one moment, though.
Mhm.
I have a cat who's misbehaving.
Sorry?
I have a cat who's misbehaving. Give
Oh,
me one
cat who's
moment.
misbehaving. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. They've been coming in fast and furious. Feel free to continue to send your questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible by the end of this program. Okay. Everything good?
Yep, she's good.
Cool. So we're getting a ton of questions, almost 50 so far. Actually more than that, I think. So I'll just do it in order, in the order they came in. Catherine asks, in particular, my father was born in today's Slovenia while it was still the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and I wonder whether to explore citizenship in Austria or his ethnic heritage of Hungary.
So there are ways to obtain Austrian citizenship by descent. I mean, I'm not going into it super in detail here, but there are ways to pursue it. It does, in this case, depend heavily on which route you're taking, whether it's by descent or by persecution. So specifically on the details of your family, where they came from, when they came from. I see, you're saying modern day Slovenia. It can be, you can be eligible, but I really, I can't say based on those specific, on those details, I can't really say on the details of a specific case, because it does require, looking at everything from, somebody's military citizenship to their immigration dates.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of
there
questions.
are
There's a
routes
lot of
through
questions
Austria.
about
Oh
borders.
no,
So,
I can mix, but Austria does have a post-Holocaust program, which can, by the way, apply to towns within the former Austro-Hungarian Empire.
oh, okay.
So it does have that, but again, everything is going to be extremely, extremely case specific.
Similarly, does Hungary mean current Hungarian borders or?
No, it does not. It actually does not. It
Okay.
can get a little bit complicated with when somebody emigrated and the citizenship, but no, it actually does not mean current Hungarian borders.
Okay.
It can mean places that are now Ukraine, which is the one I see most commonly, places that are now
Yeah, that.
Czechia.
Mhm. Okay. Um, this is an interesting question. Um, if let's see. If I am able to obtain German heritage citizenship, can my husband also obtain it even if he has no family ties to Germany?
So you would have to reside there for him to. Also be aware that Germany is a restitution citizenship, not so much a heritage citizenship. So there are different requirements than if it was a heritage citizenship.
All right, this is a long one. Let me see if I can boil it down. Um, all right, I submitted a request to the German government almost 2 years ago. The German consulate accepted my materials here in New York and told me it would take about a year to process the citizenship. Now Germany's requesting the actual naturalization document. Um, and to, let's see, and the U.S. government instructions for getting the naturalization documents were very confusing and contradictory. Do you have any suggestions?
I mean, the documents you'll need to get, depending on, it's going to depend on obviously when they naturalized, are probably going to be through the National Archives. So it really does depend. It depends on the specific details of the case. But yeah, it's the US government instructions can be extremely complicated, but it's going to depend really on where they naturalized, when they naturalized. But most likely you're going to be looking at the National Archives in this. Although you could be looking at USCIS, it's probably going to be the National Archives. You do have to provide the naturalization documents. And as for the death certificates, that sounds like a wonderful example of what I mentioned before, where sometimes they will require you to go above and beyond what is actually required for no conceivable reason. I have never had death certificates requested, but I'm not surprised because sometimes they can be a little bit odd. In those cases, I mean, I've also had cases where they've requested something and said, "Oh no, you didn't need that. 6 months ago, your coworker said I did." So it that's something where you would have to obtain the record regardless of what they're saying, regardless of what the actual like record says.
Got it. Um, okay. What if your ancestor was born a citizen of Poland, but in an area that is now in Ukraine? Does Poland have a more flexible
It
definition?
has to have been Poland in 1920, and they have to have been a citizen of Poland after that January 1st, 1920 date. That can include some areas that are now Ukraine, yes. But specifically with Poland, it is based off of you inheriting that citizenship. So your ancestor has to have been a Polish citizen residing in what was Poland at that time.
Um, does your parents' marital status affect getting citizenship in Germany or Poland?
Poland, yes, depending on when you were born. Same thing with Hungary. This is one of those things where it's going to be very date specific. It used to in Germany, now it does not. That's a very, very recent change, but it can essentially.
Okay, I was born in Germany to Polish Holocaust survivor parents and lived there till age 5. I have a German birth certificate. When we came to the US, my passport said stateless. When I last checked with the consulate in New York, they said they would not consider me for citizenship because my parents weren't German. Has that changed?
Yes, I would inquire with the consulate again. That's one of the changes that has been made in the last few years. There's a possibility, not a guarantee, but a possibility that you could obtain citizenship, in particular because you were born stateless.
What if my father, a Polish Jew, fought in the Russian army during World War II? Is that considered a loss of Polish citizenship?
I mean, that is going to be very, very, very specific, very situation specific. In most cases, yes, but not always. I hate to put it like that. This is where it starts to get very in the weeds and and I hate to, answer every question with that situation specific. But in this case, that's very situation specific. And in many cases, unless you have a proof of the Polish citizenship after World War II, you might be out of luck in that.
Okay. Do you have a list of resources by country, including, well, I'll start with, do you have a list of
So
resources by country for the ones that you highlighted in this talk?
So
First
yes
of all.
and no. I honestly, with that and with any country, I highly recommend looking at their consulate or embassy pages. This sounds like this should be, it's not obvious, and I know it's not obvious. Look at their consulate, look at their embassy. They will have a web page that says what is required for each country. You have further questions, they're usually discussions of it, but this is going to be something where you're going to look at your first resource should always be the consulate of the country that you're looking at. And like I said in my talk, don't be afraid to email them. It sounds absolutely odd when I say email the consulate, but send them an email saying, hey, is does this make me not eligible? Does this make me eligible? I have a complicated case. Is there somebody I could talk to? They often have somebody on staff who's able to and willing to. That tends to be country dependent and consulate dependent. But you will often find a lot more assistance there than you would necessarily expect.
So if a Polish grandfather served in the Israeli army, but obviously, but the person's grandmother did not, would this be a viable path? Um,
It actually depends on when they got married,
mhm.
because if she had married a foreigner before a certain date, she may have lost her citizenship. So that, I hate that I keep having it's case specific.
Yeah.
It could be a viable path.
Okay.
It could be a viable path. It could also not be a viable path. It depends on when they got married, if she ever naturalized elsewhere, etc.
Let's see. Well, this is actually a similar question, I guess. Um, can you, well, I mean, I think, can you claim?
I did discuss earlier with the marital status.
Mhm.
It does depend purely, it depends on when you're born, if your parents ever married, when they married, if you have a affidavit of paternity from your father. It depends on a lot of things. And so that's not something that I could even go into because that would be extremely case specific.
What about,
Um,
I guess, um, claiming it from a male ancestor versus a female ancestor? Is that
it depends on, I mean, it depends on the country. If you're claiming through Germany, for example, it's a lot, you can claim through a female ancestor. Some countries you need that direct male line because you quite frankly could have lost that claim through the line. So it may not even be an issue of, are you claiming to your mother, your father? It might be my great grandmother could have lost Hungarian citizenship by marriage, long before any of this was ever even thought of. So that's going to be country specific, date specific, and essentially fact specific.
got it? Mm, okay, I guess you can answer for all three countries. Um, is it possible to do this process on your own, or realistically, do you, would you need to hire a firm that specializes in this?
It depends on which country. Germany, I mean, I did it on my own. I know many people who've done it on their own. As long as you have the relevant documents, Germany is fairly straightforward. It tends to be the most, to use the phrase, user friendly of the lot. Um, Hungary and Poland can be more complicated because you do need that proof of citizenship. So in that case, it would really depend on how confident you are in it. So that means confidence not only in obtaining the records, but also in filling out the forms. The forms do have to be in Hungarian and Polish, respectively. Your comfort in ordering the records from said countries, and really just your willingness to obtain everything. It is doable. Nothing is, completely impossible. It just really does depend on the specific facts of the case. If it's your parents came from Hungary in the 60s, that's going to be a very different situation. I'll say, of course, yeah, you can absolutely do that. That's not an issue. As opposed to, my parents came from an area that may or may not have been Poland in the 1920s, and then they were displaced. That starts to become a more and more complicated thing, especially when you start having to prove negative. So it really does depend on your comfort level, your experience in obtaining documents, the complexity of the situation, and what you're willing to move forward with.
Got it. Okay. I was told that because my father was labeled stateless when he left the DP camp, I was not eligible for Polish citizenship. Is this accurate in your view?
It should not be accurate, but that depends on where he was born and when he was born. That absolutely should not be accurate, though, because I have had multiple clients of mine whose their parent or themselves were labeled stateless when they left the DP camp or were born in the DP camp, and who were able to effectively claim. So that is a wonderful case of sometimes you can do everything right, but still have.
Yeah.
In this case, you would need to prove the loss of citizenship, unless there's, some specific reason that they're claiming that he lost citizenship. Then that's complicated.
Got it. Okay, let's see. If your grandparents arrived in the US from Poland before the cutoff date, is there any other possible route?
No. And I saw that you also asked about, great uncles. You have to think about it as it's something that's being transmitted. The exact term is by blood. So it's something that you have inherited from your parents, almost, genetically almost, is how it's being defined, that they inherited from their parents. And because you're not inheriting it from, your great uncles, that it wouldn't work. It's what if they, left before the cutoff date, they were never Polish citizens. And so you cannot inherit a citizenship from them that they did not possess under Polish law.
Are you reading the next one, Caitlin?
I am, yes.
It's quite long.
So, first of all, this is going to fall under you need a new copy of the documents. The other reason, honestly, is because they don't tend to like it when there's a copy of a document from 1935. That tends to make them get real twitchy because they're like, well, our seals have changed since, this isn't the raised seal that I'm used to. And sometimes just for ease of, you don't know who you're dealing with and don't know what they're used to dealing with. Somebody, especially in a bureaucratic position, is used to seeing a specific document and a specific type of seal. The birth certificate that's being issued in 1935 is not going to be the same birth certificate that's being issued, in 2025. The seal is not going to be the same sort of raised seal today. It's not going to be a holographic seal. The consulate may look at this and say, what is this? What are you handing me? I'm not touching this because I can't prove with the modern proof that this is or isn't. Similarly, though, in this case, you were mentioning that the denouncing of other citizenships, this becomes complicated because of the age, because she was a child. There's an argument that can be made that she did not do the denunciation herself, but it depends on the consulate you would be applying through. Some of them I have seen allow it, some of them have said absolutely not.
And just for clarification, Caitlin is talking about a Polish citizenship application case now.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
So with Poland, what I meant by a line not lost via naturalization, essentially that, if great grandpa naturalizes before, your grandparent is born, then that line is lost. He can't pass Polish citizenship down if he no longer has it. And if somebody renounces or loses their Polish citizenship by military service or naturalization, that citizenship is gone, and it can't be passed down. And you need that for the entire line. So if great grandpa never naturalizes, doesn't serve in any military, has his kids in the U.S., so his kids are born American citizens because the U.S. bases it on where you're born as opposed to who you're born to. Um, those children would still be considered eligible, but if the child was born, if dad has said, I'm not a Polish citizen anymore, then you've lost the line due to naturalization.
Got it. If I already have dual citizenship with the US and Canada, is it possible to add a third European citizenship?
Yes. Yes, you would just have to speak to your relevant consulates beforehand, talk to the Canadian authorities. I don't have a ton of experience there,
Mhm.
but I know of people who are taking what I'll call a Pokemon approach to citizenships and trying to get as many as possible. They have to touch them all. So
What
it's
about
possible.
uh follow up to that? What about American and Israeli citizenship?
I know many dual or trial US, Israeli, insert European country here citizens. I myself am dual US, Germany,
Mhm.
Canada. I'm not 100% sure on. I am under the impression that it is similar, but I always tell people if when in doubt, speak to your local government, speak to somebody in charge who is being paid by somebody's tax dollars to answer these questions. That's their job. That's what they're there for. Please ask.
My grandmother immigrated from Germany to New York in 1951. Is it possible that the date range for Germany will ever be extended? Um,
So that depends less on when she emigrated from Germany to New York, because plenty of people who were Holocaust survivors who came in that period still have descendants who are eligible. The question is what the state of her citizenship was. This is one where if she had, in 1949 reclaimed said lost citizenship and then come to the US and renounce said citizenship, you actually might still have a path. They have made huge tweaks to the way that that is applied. And I would, again, I'm going to say it like this, I would contact the consulate because you actually may have a path. It's not just, left Germany between 33 and 45, it is lost German citizenship. So any Jew who was residing in Germany still lost their citizenship, and any Jew with German citizenship who was residing outside of Germany lost their citizenship. So the question there becomes, what citizenship did she have when she emigrated to New York?
how do you prove uh, that someone did not do US military service?
You basically need to obtain with a document indicating no record found. They do get issued, it's issued by, in this case, the US military, but you need to basically have it issued that no, this person never served in the military.
Would that be through the Veterans Administration?
I believe so, but don't quote me on that. I
Okay.
have not had that issue in the past. It's more they believe that they have the list of everybody who lost their citizenship via military service. However, I would actually reach out to the VA because I believe I actually have had a client where we reached out to the VA and got a document that said this person never served in the US military.
Got it.
So I know I'm contradicting myself there, but it's one where, yeah, it would be the VA. I'm just thinking because this was a few years ago. Um,
Okay. I think I know the answer to this question, but if your ancestors were born in 1860 in the Kingdom of Hungary, but the town's now in Slovakia, which country is better to pursue?
It depends on when they left. They have to have been born in or become a citizen of Czechoslovakia between 1918 and 1989.
Okay.
So that gets back to residency requirements. When you have border shifting the way that your borders have shifted, things can become a lot more complicated than, with the default, oh, yes, this country has always been this country and the borders haven't changed at all.
Yeah. Okay. Would the German consulate have details based on restitution files that or the restitution files of a survivor.
If we're talking monetary restitution, you can actually, depending on the country, depending on the country, you may actually be able to get the record from the US. And this goes for most countries involving restitution. I recently obtained, just to give an example, a Romanian restitution file from the US National Archives because during the claims process, it was actually done through the United States government because, it wasn't individuals going and saying, Germany, give me this. It was a massive legal action. So it would actually honestly be a thing where, yes, you could speak to the German consulate and government depending on what program they obtained restitution via. But if it was a property restitution, for example, or certain types of monetary restitution, the National Archives might also have those documents based in the US.
Let's see. Okay, so you answered the question about a spouse of a person who's being naturalized in this path through this path. What about the person's children? And does it depend on whether the children are still minors or if they're adults?
It depends on whether they're minors or adults, but my thing is going to be always apply as a group because you may need fewer copies of things. You can apply as a single packet. Apply as a group. Apply in one go because also then you're ordering all the things at the same time. Everybody's making sure they have everything done. And also you need fewer duplicates.
Okay. I guess it's similar. If a person was born in what was then Germany, but now Poland, can you still apply for German citizenship?
Like I said before, Germany is a citizenship based on restitution due to persecution during the Holocaust. So it depends fully on what citizenship and where they were residing in that period.
Somebody asks how, well, we can leave that for the end, actually. Let's see. It's another. Okay. Okay, when one goes to the consulate with original long form documents, should we bring copies of those documents to leave with the officials? And then
So you make copies, but you're leaving the originals with them.
okay.
But you do make copies. You do have to have copies of them. But the officials will take the original documents. You'll have everything returned to you afterwards, but they do take the originals.
Okay. And do those, oh, I guess this is based on the copies. So the answer is yes, you need to leave your original documents with the consulate.
Yes.
But of course, keep a copy for yourself. Somebody's asking about apostilles. Did you?
Yes, it's an additional level of verification, of document verification under the Hague Convention. Some countries do require it, and essentially that means that you're going to have to take your documents and then go to an additional government body to approve that, yes, this is in fact the real deal. We are approving, we're apostilling it. I will warn everybody, there's one very particular pitfall with apostilles. They will staple something to it. Do not unstaple it. This sounds like it should be common knowledge. It somehow is not. If you unstaple it, if you remove the staple, if you mess with it in any way, you are unapostilling the document, and now you're back at square one.
Oh,
Please
wow.
don't do that. But for example, the New York City clerk is where you might have something apostilled. It just depends on the relevant government body for the document that you are having apostilled.
And is that generally the body that from which you obtain that particular document, or?
No, it can be different departments of state. It could be clerks. It depends on the jurisdiction, because the U.S. has many, 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 many jurisdictions, and each one operates with its own special rules and then makes new rules for itself because it feels like it
Oh, wow.
can't speak in particular to them unless we're talking about one particular jurisdiction.
Okay. I'm going to change this slightly. When did the US require that all immigrants arrive with uh passports or I guess I would also say visas?
So these are requirements you're only looking in the 1920s. Before that, you're not really you're not requiring it. You're requiring all aliens to obtain visas in 1917 is when it starts getting required, but those don't get really put into a place where you're really requiring a heavy visa until you're starting to look at the quota system. But starting in 1917, moving forward, the Immigration Act of 1924 continues the quota system that gets set up in 21. Consuls are, denying visas, but that's when it really, really starts to be harder. Supposedly 1917, I've seen many post 1917 arrivals without a visa. Um, but the most concrete date for that will be 21 and then 24, 24 being the most solid of dates. So it really does depend. I hate to say this because now I'm talking in the past. Depends in some ways on who it is. Certain people may have been able to get away with it a little better. They were supposed to. Before 1917, there is none. Um, yes.
Um, let's see. Someone tried to request naturalization documents from the US federal government via email, but they never received a reply. Is there another path that you would recommend?
I mean, you would have to contact the National Archives in question or the or USCIS, just depending on when they naturalized. Yeah, it depends either on the National Archives, when they naturalized, where they naturalized, because it does depend on which state. And then the top level is going to be USCIS. The National Archives does have a page that goes in particular into what dates and where they are governing this by. Basically, like, if you naturalized in Alabama, it's going to be different than if you naturalized in Texas or if you naturalized in Utah or if you naturalized in New York. And then it gives you the relevant people to contact. I do recommend going through that because this is going to be very case specific. It depends on when you naturalized, where you naturalized, and where you naturalized through.
Oh, okay. Um, would I guess Holocaust related records be like for example records that you might find on on the Yad Vashem database or the US Holocaust Memorial Museum database? Would those be applicable to um
I
citizenship
have seen
applications?
documents from the Arlson archive accepted for German citizenship.
Okay.
Most of the time, though, no. Most of the time, they have a formula for what they're expecting to see, and that would be in addition. The caveat to that, of course, are Holocaust restitution related naturalizations, and in those cases, they can be if they're relevant to prove what you need them to prove. So yes, they do. I've used similar documents, for example, to prove a loss or revocation of German citizenship, but it really does become a little bit case specific here.
Have the events uh of post October 7th made the process even more difficult?
No, but it has definitely, in the way that it has caused longer lines for citizenships. I've seen the application time go up further.
Got it. Okay.
I saw a question about Polish citizenship through a female line. The issue there becomes if she married a non-Polish citizen before 1951, she will have lost her Polish citizenship. So it can be done through a female line. So, for example, if your mother but then your mother's father and mother's father's father are the line, then you might be in good shape as long as your parents married after 1951. But if we're talking, the person who left Poland is your female ancestor and she married before 1951, then she can have lost her Polish citizenship. So that tends to basically sever that line.
Vital records, is there one particular resource that you would recommend for which government agencies to request vital records from?
It depends on where we're talking, because even the example I will always give to people, because it is just such a beautiful example. When I got married, I registered my marriage. I got my marriage license in the city of New York. We got it in Manhattan. The marriage was carried out in Suffolk County on Long Island. We did this because it is substantially easier to get a copy of the marriage license record from New York City than it is from a smaller town on Long Island or from the state of New York. It is that definitive. We're talking, an hour and a half drive between the two locations, and it's a completely different process. So much so that my husband, who is also a genealogist, and I chose to file it in one place and get married another for that reason. Records requests can differ. The state of New York does not have a New York City birth certificate. They don't know. DC is a completely different unit all of its own, for example, for obvious reasons. Different states have different procedures, different restrictions. There's no one overarching resource because there are so many elements at play with every single place. So it really does become very, very document specific down to the date. Even two marriages in New Jersey, you might have to request them from different places just based on when they happen. And that's going to be true almost anywhere.
That's true in New York too.
Yeah, I was going to say, if somebody got married, in 1949, you're getting that marriage license from the municipal archives. After 1949, you're getting it completely different.
Yep.
It varies so wildly that you can't make a specific call.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. How does one deal with small informal changes in last names?
I apologize, one moment, I'm off of the camera for a second, but essentially it depends on how informal and if it was documented, if there's a way to prove that those are indeed the same person. So, for example, if we're talking Schmidt to Smith, rather, that's going to be a much easier one to prove conclusively than if we're talking somebody going from Goldwasser to Levy. In those cases, you hope that it is documented on a naturalization document that they arrived under one name and are now utilizing another. That is documented more often than not. You hope that there is, for example, a formal name change. Of course, if we are talking about these small informal name changes, it really depends on how big of one it is. If we're talking a huge name change, you do have to provide you do have to provide more than others, but you would be surprised at what all does get recorded.
I have read that Polish emigres who fought for the Allied forces in World War II are not denied citizenship on the basis of military service. Is that true?
Yes, but they can be denied citizenship based on post-military service naturalization. So, for example, the case and the reason that was actually put in place is that many Polish Poles went to the UK and actually joined the Royal Air Force and flew bombing missions over Germany. after the fall of Poland. This was very common. The Polish army in exile operated in some areas as an extension of the British. Those obviously, even if they were registered as serving with the British military, they're not going to deny their descendants citizenship. Similar with US, etc. However, if that guy stays in England, naturalizes, and the family stays in England, it's that naturalization that becomes the stickler then, as opposed to the military service.
Oh, this is an interesting one. What obligations does an applicant have to Poland once citizenship is granted?
So that depends on, really, you don't have to go there. You don't have to live there. You don't have to go to Poland. Um, so yeah, it's really, I don't have any obligations to Germany. I can't be drafted in Germany. They don't currently have a draft. If a draft was instituted, there could be a possibility there, but it's it's
What
fewer than
about
you would think,
taxes? Oh,
basically.
sorry.
Taxes, no. The US is actually one of the only countries that taxes its expats. I know a lot of American Olim specifically very much dislike this particular rule.
Yeah.
Most countries do not tax their expats.
Okay. I guess I'm going to take the one part of this question. How would you confirm, how could you confirm that a person who moved to a new country, um, could you prove that they did not become a citizen
Yes,
of that country? Yeah.
USCIS actually issues the document specifically proving that somebody did not apply for American citizenship.
Okay.
So yes, and there are similar routes with various countries.
Awesome.
But yes, they do issue specifically records not found documents, or this person did not do this.
Okay. Oh, for Polish citizenship, if you are a dual US and Israeli citizen, is it better to apply from the US or from Israel?
Apply from where you're a resident.
Okay.
That's simple enough.
Um, what kinds of documents can help in Poland if my ancestors left without a passport?
You would need to prove that they were Polish citizens. So the birth record, for example, of your ancestor, if they were left in 22 and 24, so you would need the birth record of them. If you have any documents, not necessarily of them leaving, but of them arriving in the new country to show where their last residence was, that can work. It tends to get more and more close, just depending. But in this case, you would basically need to prove their residency. If one of them is a child, school records can survive. I've actually utilized school records for this before
Oh, wow.
because that does prove that this person is residing there. If we have their parents' address in Krakow, okay, this person is residing in Poland and we have their birth record in Krakow. Person's a resident in Poland. So sometimes you have to go a little bit outside of the box in that case, but I've seen that many times.
Let's see. Are there any questions that jump out to you, Caitlin?
Um, I mean, I saw that somebody asked specifically in their case, their grandmother and mother went from Shanghai from Breslau and asked, just because they never returned to Germany, can I still pursue German citizenship? My family left Germany for Montevideo, Uruguay, and came to the US in 47, and I was able to pursue it. So yes, it's because they were not in Germany, they would have had their citizenship revoked. Would they have left Germany for Shanghai if they had not been persecuted? No, they would not have. So they fall under the class of somebody that is persecuted and somebody that was denied their citizenship rights due to persecution.
To begin the process of Polish citizenship, would I be able to inquire with friends in Poland to assist with the process?
I mean, I don't see
Sorry.
what you would be inquiring for them to do. I mean, there are only so many things that somebody in Poland can initiate the process doing. I mean, you would be working through your local consulate, through the consulate that you're basically zoned for. So it would be something, if you have somebody in Poland who could maybe collect a record for you, then that would be different. But I mean, you would be initiating the process here. As for you, friends who are professional translators in Poland, it depends on if they're certified translators, which is different. It's specific translators that the Polish government recognizes, as opposed to just a professional translator. I wish that they would accept just professional translators, because I have people I use for court who the Polish government say, well, they're good enough for court, but they're not good enough for citizenship.
There's there's still a lot of questions, but I think we should start winding down. Do you have one last question that jumps out at you, Caitlin?
I'm just taking a look right now. I see a lot of questions about leaving Galicia before 1920. If you did, then you're not eligible for Poland. However, I do see questions too about, and this is several questions about being born in some place that was Poland, but is now no longer Poland, because, as I say very frequently to people, Poland can be a very nebulous concept, um, historically speaking. But for example, somebody asked about being born in Vilna in 1922. Yes, as long as that person would be considered a Polish citizen and be able to pass it down if you meet the other requirements. So yes, I see a number of questions as well. I'm just trying to take a look. I did see somebody mention something that I am going to give a little bit of pushback on. No, your ancestor's name was not changed at Ellis Island. That is an urban legend. Nobody's name was changed for them at any port of immigration to the United States. Your ancestor changed their own name. That is absolutely a myth. However, you would be able to unravel the name change by following the naturalization documents and the immigration path. Um,
I realized I was muted. Uh, do we need to notify any US agency if we decide to accept dual citizenship?
no, because the US, if you're in the US and being governed by the US considers you solely a US citizen no matter where you are or what you're doing, because the US does it like that. It's the same reason why they are taxing people if they live abroad.
Oh, this is an
Um,
interesting question too, because you talked about obligations to another country once you become a citizen. But for Germany, for example, um, if you become a German citizen, um, are you allowed to vote in German elections?
if you are residing in Germany, yes.
Okay, but if you're residing in the US, then that would be no.
I believe so, but I would double check. I have not voted personally in German elections and never looked into it as much, so I would have to double check. But most countries, you do have to reside.
Okay, I am gonna cut it off here because you've been quite
Right. And I do
generous in
see
your
questions
time
about like
and
arriving stateless. You would still have a visa even if you arrived without a passport. So there's still a visa if somebody um, applies. I do see someone who says that they received their Hungarian citizenship and are filing for their children. Yes, your route did not require you knowing Hungarian. However, some routes do. It depends on your specific family history. So many routes do require learning some Hungarian. The main route does not. So I do see somebody who asked about that and wanted to clarify that.
Okay. So for everyone, what is your preferred method of contact if people want to reach out to you?
I have an email with my business. That would probably be the best one because then my husband could also reply, who also does this work.
Do you want to write that in the chat?
Sure. Let me see if I can do that. Let's see, chat. So that is our email, which would probably be the best.
So info at Hollander
Dash
was.com. Yeah. Okay, well, I think there's a lot of obviously very, very case specific details that you've well, you've answered to the extent of that you can without knowing those details for sure.
Right, and that's always the thing is that there are so many things that are so case specific that it's making a lot of these general questions is sometimes with more specific questions I have to say it depends 100% on the details.
Yeah, the devil's in the
The
details,
chat
right?
is disabled. I see a few
What? Sorry?
comments that they can't see the chat.
Oh, did you? Let's see. Oh, I think you have to change it to everyone.
Oh, look at that.
I think you
I
just sent
guess
it
that was
to,
on me.
I think you just
There
sent
we
it
go.
to me. Okay. There we
Did
go.
that work?
So again, it's info at Hollander-Waas, WAAS.com. Okay, so with that, thank you so much. I I I can't thank you enough for taking the time to both present these different case studies and also answering like about a million questions.
I wish I had more time to answer more of them.
I know. All right. Have a good night, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you at the next program.